Hello friends and welcome back to the Big Book Challenge. My name is Katie and for years I have been scared of anything over like 350 pages. But in 2023 I was determined to conquer that fear. And so I set out to read 10 big books in 2023. And to spice it up, I let my patrons pick every month which book I'm going to be reading. And then I share my experience reading that book with you in a spoiler-filled vlog, which is this one right here. So for my next big book challenge, I gave my patrons a choice of a handful of books, but they opted for The Witch King by Martha Wells. Now, I know what you're going to say. This book's only 420 pages. Does it even count? Well, firstly, it's 414 pages. But yes, I'm counting it. This is my challenge and I make the rules. But to be fair, when I put it on the list, I did think that it was over 500 pages. Like I got it from the library and it just felt like it was a big book. So I just assumed. And what do we know about making assumptions? Like we already know. I am your cautionary tale. But here I am to read my 414 page book, which I did get out from the library and it is overdue. If you're my librarian, please don't be mad at me. I promise I'm going to read this as quickly as I can and I'm going to get it back. Now, this is the beginning of a new series by Martha Wells, and to be perfectly honest, I don't know an awful lot about it, primarily because I am 4 books deep in the Murderbot Diaries series by Martha Wells, and I told myself that I wasn't allowed to start anything new by Martha Wells until I caught up on the Murderbot Diaries. However, I have not read any Murderbot this year, so I'm still several books behind. But in my defense, when I showed up at the library a couple of weeks ago, this book was sitting pretty in their new releases. And it being a new release, I just figured that it would already be hired out for the next 6 months. I got it out on loan. And here we are. N.K. Jemisin herself has blurbed this book, and she says, a wildly original and complex fantasy exploring how revolutions are won through trust and destroyed through selfishness. Wells excels at brooding, powerful, inhuman protagonists who just need a little kindness to be their badass best. That's a hard word to say in an Australian accent. Badass. I mean, we would say badass, but it doesn't have the same ring to it. There's not much else in terms of like the plot or the story or the tropes on the back, except that we are told that, you know, we get Martha Wells' signature ability to create wonderful characters in this, which is definitely like one of my favorite parts of Murderbot is Murderbot itself. It's such a wonderful character, one of my favorites. So I am just genuinely excited, but like I said, I'm also late on my library loan. So we need to stop talking. We need to get to reading now. So I'm up to chapter 7 and I'm 148 pages in, which means it's time for an update. So firstly, this book is taking me longer to read than I thought it was going to, which is why I have decided to purchase myself a copy. And today I will be finally returning my already overdue library book. There's a few reasons that this book is taking me a little bit longer to read than I'd initially expected, which like I'm not upset about. It's just a fact. One is because I had initially started listening to the audiobook and reading along at the same time, like immersion reading. But I got a couple of chapters in and I was finding the audiobook was not helping. I was not enjoying it. I wouldn't go so far as to say that there's anything wrong with the narration. I just think that the other factor as to why this is taking me a while to read, which is the fact that it's pretty kind of complex in a lot of ways. And I think more to the point, you're just thrown in the deep end right from the beginning, which meant that I needed to take my time with it. And I needed to have space to go back and reread a paragraph or, you know, flip through pages back and forth a little bit, refer to the character guide at the beginning. So I turned off the audiobook. I'm just reading it physically now, which does mean it's just going to take me a little bit longer to read. And that's okay. So like I said, this book does feel a little convoluted at the beginning. I don't think it's unnecessarily convoluted. I think yes, Ollie. I think more to the point, like I said, you just really are thrown in the deep end. It almost feels like there's a story already happening and you just kind of like happen to enter at the point that you do. The characters are not stopping to info dump and explain things to you. There's no kind of like all-seeing narrator that is explaining things to you. It's just happening and you've got to kind of like take it in your stride and trust that you're going to put things together as you go. A lot of character names are thrown at you. Their relationships aren't like overly explained. They're just there on display and you got to kind of like put the dots together. Put the pieces together, connect the dots, you know what I mean? So I think it is a book that you just kind of like have to have a bit of patience with at the beginning, and that was reasonably easy for me because I trust Martha Wells. Like I've had such good experiences with Murderbot that I was okay kind of like waiting for things to click into place for me. And I would say that for maybe the first 3 chapters or so, I don't know that I was enjoying it. I was just kind of like there waiting to start enjoying it. And I would say now that I am. I wouldn't go so far as to say that like I'm loving it and I can't wait to pick it up again, but when I'm reading it, I'm engaged and I'm interested. And I am intrigued to see where things are going. So basically this book is dual timeline, but both timelines are primarily focused on our main character, Kai, who is the titular Witch King. And he's a demon of some kind and seems to be like a bit of an important demon as well. And in the present day timeline, we meet him just as he's kind of waking up and realizing that he is being captured. And we watch as he kind of like rescues his friend Zeddy. I'm going to call her Zeddy. I get like it's a fantasy book. I don't know how to say everybody's name. And he also rescues this little girl named Sanja or Sanya. And the three of them flee this situation together. And we find out that it's been a year since Kai and Zeddy were captured. And so they don't know what's happened to their friends and family. And in particular, Zeddy's concerned about her wife. And so essentially now they're going off on a quest and adventure to find out what's been going on, who captured them, why, and where Zeddy's wife is. In the secondary timeline, that is set in the past. And it seems to be set around when Kai was kind of like a baby demon. Essentially demons from the Underearth, I think they call it, can and often do take like physical hosts. It seems like for Kai and a lot of people it is often voluntary. He took a body that was dying. Her name was Anna. And so Kai kind of like takes over her body and lives through her body. But anyway, in that timeline, I think there's essentially like a war going on. There's like the hierarchs and the expositors, and they just seem to be like genociding all over the place. And in this timeline, we're seeing how Kai and Zeddy and some of the other friends that we know in the present timeline, how they first meet. So I'm assuming that the war or like the revolution or whatever it is that's happening in the past timeline will have something to do with the present day timeline. But so far, essentially, we are following Kai at two different points in his life, and we're watching him interact with some of the same people. And I suppose that is how we're learning a lot of the backstory to what is happening in present day. I am someone who doesn't always love dual timeline. I don't hate it in the same way a lot of people do, but I do just find with books that are like multiple perspectives or dual timeline or multiple timeline, you just kind of have to be more patient with them, especially at the beginning. And in the meantime, you can only hope that the characters and the stories are enough to pull you along. So far, I wouldn't say that I'm like in love with any of the characters. I think Zeddy's probably my favorite. She also has magic. I'm not sure if she's a witch. Does it tell me in the character stuff? She's a high teacher in the mountain cloisters of the Kalen Islands. Okay, a high teacher. I don't know if that means she's a witch or what she is, but she can kind of control the winds and the weather. And I think especially because she doesn't know what's happened to her wife, she's quite impatient with anyone who's in her way. She and Kai in the present day timeline seem to have some kind of like connection, but essentially they can kind of like communicate and like sense where each other are and stuff. Kai is a very powerful demon. I don't know the extent of all his powers yet, but one of the main things that we've seen him do is like move between bodies. It's not something he likes doing, but like he can, and obviously that means that he's pretty hard to kill. And one thing I found interesting in this book is the way that his ability to move between bodies is kind of expressed. Like he is very clearly described as masculine. His pronouns are always he, him, regardless of the body that he's in. And there have just been a few kind of like little hints to the ways that gender is expressed in different cultures in this world. And so far we haven't had any of that bullshit grimdark like rape fantasy crap. Honestly, that's a big turn off for me, is male authors pretending like abusing women makes their worlds more realistic. To me, a lot of the time when I've read that stuff, it just feels like those male authors enjoy writing that stuff a little bit too much, and I don't enjoy reading it. That's not to say there is not violence in this world. There absolutely is, but it's not like unnecessarily gendered for no reason. Something else Kai seems to be able to do is like eat people, like he eats their souls, which is a very demon sort of thing to do, right? This is a book with a lot of just like casual diversity too. A lot of different like skin tones and skin colors are described. And then obviously one of our main protagonists, Zeddy, is clearly queer. It's not done in a way that is like heavily commented upon or like overly focused on. It's just kind of all there, just like implicit diversity. So I suppose that's where we're at for now. The gist is I don't really know what's going on, but I'm curious to see where it goes, and I like it so far. I had initially assumed that this was the beginning of a new series, but I've since found out that like I don't know that anybody knows that that's true. Apparently it reads pretty well as a standalone, and I think it's just like the complexity of the world building that makes people assume that this was a setup for further exploration in further books. But I don't know that we have a series or a second book confirmed yet, which does make me feel like I'm a third of the way through already and I still don't know what's going on. And the idea of everything coming together in a really satisfying way in only 400 pages. All of a sudden 400 pages doesn't seem like a lot, whereas obviously at the beginning it seemed like plenty. So all that's left to do really is to keep reading. I'll check in with you around the 300 page mark. So normally for reading vlogs, for like the very first clip that you see me and my kind of final wrap up review, I like to, you know, set up my big camera with my fancy microphone, like be a little bit more done up. But for this book, I just want it over. I just want this book to be out of my life. So we're not even going to bother with that. I've literally just come home, finished work, and I haven't even finished this book. But I'm sorry, my friends, we are DNFing. I have been putting this decision off for like the last 2 weeks. I'm up to page 207, which I don't even know what chapter that is. They're not all numbered. It's a little bit weird, but I'm about halfway through, right? I have been stuck at this halfway point for, I don't know, like 10 days. And I know that I could smash through the rest of this book in just a couple of hours. And so I've been telling myself for the last few days, like, just do it, just get it over and done with. But instead, you know what's been happening is I just haven't read anything for a week. And I'm starting to get annoyed about it. I'm just genuinely starting to get upset. I just need to DNF this book. So before we get into it, I am sorry to my patrons who voted for me to read this book. I can't do it. So in case it's not clear, I really don't like this book. I have not been having a good time. I think for the first 20, even to 30% of the book, I was just kind of thinking, you know, like this is the kind of book where you just need to take your time, like letting yourself sink in, letting yourself get acquainted with all of the characters and the machinations. And so I found that kind of like intriguing in a sense. Like I was just curious to see where all of these things that we were learning were going to go. But at some point, and I'm not exactly sure what point that was, but not long after my last check-in with you, I think I just basically realized that I was making out as if this book was more complicated than it was. Like, yes, we are thrown in the deep end in the sense that a lot of names and places and words and like types of magic, like all of this is just kind of like thrown at us without too much explanation. But like the content and the plot itself it's not that complex. Like not much has changed since I last checked in with you. Like essentially we do have the two timelines. The past timeline is where Kai and his friends like participated in a revolution. They didn't like initiate the revolution. I wouldn't even say they were revolutionaries, especially for Kai. He just kind of like happened to be in the right place at the right time and figured he'd join in. And then we've got the present day timeline where basically Zedi and Kai have awoken, realized that they've been captured and betrayed, and like we're kind of seeing the ramifications of their revolution that they participated in. That's it. That's what's going on. So I guess right now I'm feeling like this is actually not as complex as I was making it out to be, or like I'd heard it was. I think basically it's just because, you know, it takes you a little while to like remember all the character names and stuff. Like that's the hard part of this fantasy. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. There are like 3 different types of magic that's like maybe a little bit convoluted. And there's clearly like political stuff happening and like different factions and groups. But like in terms of us following the story of Kai, it's not that complex. So why have I become so miserable at the idea of finishing this book? Essentially, it is that I just do not care. It's one of those books that is very much centered around a handful of characters. In particular, we've got Kai, Zedi, and a couple of others. And they're just like going from place to place to like find somebody. And along the way, they like make some more friends. And so like their kind of like party gets a bit bigger. It all just feels very side questy. Like I don't know how else to put it. It just feels like, oh, we've got to go there because maybe the answer will be there. And when we get there, we find out that the answer's not there, but maybe it'll be over here. So let's go there. Which is just not like the most interesting kind of like plot development and story for me to follow personally. But every now and then there are books that kind of follow that as a story trajectory that I can get on board with. And the reason is because I like or love the characters. And even if I don't really like them, like I wouldn't necessarily want to be friends with them, I'm interested by them as people. These characters, absolutely not. Could not care less. Kai is like this immortal who occasionally comes out with a funny one-liner, but they're not even that funny. And it's like, if for whatever situation they're in, one of his magics doesn't work for him, he can just use a different one. Like he just feels so OP, basically. He feels so overpowered that it's just kind of boring and dull. And then characters like Zedi, again, like boring as hell. Like, yeah, she's on a quest to find her wife, and I thought that that is a storyline I could get invested in. But because I don't really know who Zedi is as a person, I just don't care about her. Again, kind of like Kai, she occasionally comes out with like mildly funny one-liners. But aside from being impatient and a little bit sassy, like she doesn't feel like a person to me. So yeah, that is essentially the crux of my issue. I have plenty of like other kind of complaints that are tangential, but the crux is that I do not care about the characters whatsoever. Nothing about what Martha Wells has been doing so far has made me feel invested in their journey whatsoever. I don't love any of the characters. I don't even like hate them enough to care about what happens. Like I just feel nothing. And I know I've said before that To me, a boring book is almost worse than a bad book. Like if a book cannot elicit emotion in me, cannot make me feel a sense of investment, especially one that is over 400 pages. Like what am I doing? Why am I wasting my time? I genuinely would prefer to hate read a book that I'm mad about, because at least then I am feeling something. Everything about this book to me feels very just surface level. I don't get a sense of the characters' real emotions. I know who the good guys are, I know who the bad guys are. I understand that the good guys, you know, are a little bit morally grey, but like I know who I'm supposed to be rooting for and who are like the people out there doing genocide, you know? Everything's just kind of like hinted at, and not in a way that makes me more intrigued, just in a way that makes me feel like maybe there isn't that much depth here really. And the fact that I do not care about any of these characters, I feel quite heartbroken and honestly confused, because as I said in the intro, Murderbot is one of my favorite characters of all time. I love Murderbot. Like even when I don't give those books a 5-star, spending that time with Murderbot is always a joy. And so even though I'm not really somebody who's like super into like sci-fi action, I don't really care what's happening in those books because I just want to keep following along with Murderbot so much. And so I'm genuinely shocked that an author who wrote a character who has become one of my all-time favorites. Like if you were to ask me out of the blue, tell me about a character that you love, like Murderbot would definitely be one of those ones that would come to mind. That's how much I love it. And so the idea that Martha Wells has written a book with a bunch of characters, arguably too many for what's going on, and I don't give a shit about a single one, is honestly, it's just mind-boggling to me. Now, normally with a video like this, I would honestly just scrap it, but I know I've mentioned several times that I'm reading Witch King, there's a spoiler-filled video coming, don't worry. And obviously my patrons voted on it, they're expecting a video from me too. So I sort of feel like I just need to finish what I started in terms of the video, even if I'm not finishing the book. And like I said, I have been kind of putting off deciding really to DNF this book for almost 2 weeks, because even though I know I could smash this out really quite quickly, like honestly, I could finish it tonight. But like the idea of spending my Friday evening reading this, like I just can't think of anything more miserable. So I think definitely the fact that I just like haven't touched another book in almost 2 weeks is the deciding factor for me. Like what, am I just not like never going to read another book again until I finally get around to finishing this one? And I think the other thing that kind of made my mind up for me is last night I decided to go and watch some other reviews, because I had read a few reviews on GoodReads, and on GoodReads I did see a lot of people talking about how you kind of just got to give this book some time, and once you get to like the 20, even 30% mark, then you'll be in it, which is essentially what I said earlier, right? Like there's a lot of stuff thrown at you and you just need to give it some time to settle in. And that I am more than happy to kind of be patient with, right? But what I have not heard is people say that the second half of this book is exceptional, or that it's drastically different from the first half. I haven't heard anybody say, oh yeah, I hated the first half, but once I got to the second half, like it just really took off and it was so exciting and I loved the characters all of a sudden. And last night I did decide to watch a video that did speak kind of vaguely about the end and the spoilers towards the end. And to be honest, I'm not somebody who minds being spoiled for things. It doesn't usually ruin a book for me. Like just recently, my last big book was The Golem and the Jinni, and I was spoiled for that ending, and yet I loved that book regardless. Basically, I'm not super spoiler sensitive is what I'm getting at. And so if this reviewer had spoken about some like amazing ending that just made the whole journey worthwhile, I probably would have kept reading just to experience it for myself, you know? But when they spoke about the ending, like I just felt nothing. I didn't care. I was not interested in how that ending came about. I don't want to participate in that ending or the journey. And so that's what kind of sealed the deal for me. The idea that I know how it's going to end and I still don't care. So again, I am really sorry to my patrons and to anybody who was really looking forward to me reading this. I hate it. I just hate it. I don't know what else to say. Like when I say that, I don't mean that it's like problematic and I'm mad at it. In fact, I almost would rather be mad at it, you know? Like I feel so little that it's irritating me. It's frustrating spending so many hours with these characters, with this story, and still just like not feeling anything. So if you're sensing anger, that's what that is. It's like this frustration, like this sense of pointlessness. And I don't know what else to say. Like I don't have somebody in mind who I would recommend this to. I know people have loved this. I'm not saying that it's an objectively bad book, but I can't see the positives in it, to be perfectly honest. So take my review of the first half of the book with a grain of salt. But honestly, at this point, I think this big book challenge is turning out to be a bit of a flop. What is it now? I think I've only really loved one of the big books I've read so far this year. Honestly, it's pathetic. I don't know, like, do I just have a really bad sense of what a big book should be? Am I picking the entirely wrong books? Or part of me just feels like my deeply held belief that most books would be better with more editing and a shorter page count. It's just being reaffirmed. And I know it's confirmation bias, but like, I don't know what else to do with this data at this point, you know? And again, I am sorry for how this is ending, but I would love to hear, if you've read this book, what you thought of it. Do you think I'm objectively wrong? Because like, fair enough. Or like me, do you think that this is utterly mediocre and barely worth the pages that it's printed on? That sounds so mean. Anyway, I'm gonna stop talking before I get meaner than I already have been. A big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. And again, I'm sorry to Olivia, Lynette Brown, and Marie. Here's hoping our next big book will go a little bit better. Until next time, bye.